So we might begin. I'd like to welcome everyone here today and in our continuing exploration of Shantideva's marvelous text. And I'm going to hand over to Lou. Thank you, Lou, if you'd like to lead our prayers.
Okay. Opening prayers. Taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create the listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create the listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create to listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well. Subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion, or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop, or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning, or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds. And may beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. The Heart of Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Master Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in a concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara: how should any son of the lineage trained wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter lineage wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no touch, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on up to including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There's no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there's no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment and reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared: Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, saying: Well said, son of lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shravati Putra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Ari Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised, thus spoken by the Bhagavan. The praise to Manjushri. Homage to my Guru and Protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of his seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dhamma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance, you whose princely body is adorned with 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Rapatsanadi. With the brilliance of a wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. The other mandala. By virtue of offering to you assembly of Buddhas, visualized before me, this mandala built on a base, resplendent with flowers, saffron water, and incense, adorned with Mount Meru and 4 continents, as well as the sun and the moon. May all sentient beings share in its good effects. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds, for I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all possessions, which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dhammakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dhamma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Nayatayami. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Gurus.
Thank you very much. So we'll just spend a few moments withdrawing our minds from our hustle bustle, our sort of endless engagement in innumerable daily activities or evening activities, and become aware of our mind just as it is. And for a few in and out breaths, let any agitations, mental stress or tensions leave with the out breath in the form of smoke, tumbling away, dissolving completely. Then with the immediate in-breath, radiant, enlightened energy pours into us, relaxing and stabilizing our mind. Making it an upturned vessel so that the words of Dharma will be able to remain with us, not just flow out. But more importantly, we motivate that we're going to spend time in this session to try to find ways to overcome our own limitations, particularly those that prevent us from regarding each and every sentient being as equally precious. Spontaneously, they appear to us as equally precious. if we can generate great love and great compassion, we'll actually be able to see them in this way. How wonderful, how extraordinary. So all the worldly biases, divisions, and wars would then be impossible if beings had these two minds in place. So given the turmoil of our world, feel that for our part, we can definitely concentrate on this transformation internally so that both now and in the future, we might be spontaneous agents of benefit rather than harm for both ourselves and others. And with that, we can commence the more formal part of our session today. Last week, we, as part of our sweeping overview of how all the perfections really rely upon or depend upon the mind, we tackled the topic mental stabilization depends on the mind. And this refers to verse 16 of Shantideva's text. The knower of reality has said that even if recitation and physical hardships are practiced for long periods of time, they will be meaningless if the mind is distracted elsewhere. And last week, a definition was given of mental stabilization as a mind which, in its own power, has the ability to focus on an object for as long as one wishes. This is an absolutely uniquely precious state of mind, because such stabilization has obvious advantages, not just for developing a firm and reliable meditation practice, but it's going to enable us to zero in upon and deeply analyze particular things with extraordinary subtlety and extraordinary precision. And this will particularly be the case when we tackle the topic of wisdom. So regarding the advantages of meditative stabilization, a very classic tale is given in the Lam Rim, which goes, a competition was being held between a skilled swordsman and an archer. No matter how many arrows the archer shot, the swordsman's whirling sword deflected and cut them down. When the archer had only one arrow left and was afraid that he might lose the competition, his wife, who was very beautiful, had an idea. She said, I'll take a stroll across the fields. The moment he catches sight of me, shoot your arrow, your last arrow, immediately. She stepped out. The swordsman saw her, was distracted by desire, and the archer's arrow mortally wounded him. As he lay dying, he said, not the arrow, but my own lack of mindfulness killed me. So we can appreciate, even at a glance, the intent of Shantideva's verse. Praising this mind, Tsongkhapa says, concentration, which is another translation for stabilization, is a king with dominion over the mind. Once placed, immovable like the king of mountains. When directed, it engages with every kind of virtuous object and induces the great bliss of a malleable body and mind. Knowing this, powerful yogis continually practice meditative stabilization, which defeats all inimicable distraction. So that inimical distraction was for example, the force of desire that cost the swordsman his life. This is obviously a metaphor for how we must use concentration in our own practice. So Geshe Sonam Rinchen, in his account of this perfection, gives a brief account of its advantages. He says, when one has gained a calmly abiding mind, the 7 preparatory stages and the concentrations of the form and formless realms can be developed. So I'm stopping the quote there for a moment. Because, I'm just intersposing, because there is a distinct link between this need for calm abiding and the generation of wisdom, deep wisdom, Geshe Sonam Rinchen immediately goes on to explain, I quote, the prime purpose for developing a calmly abiding mind is as a basis for special insight. Those of the highest caliber use this powerful tool for the analysis. This is actually, now a quote from Kunsang Pelden. The primary purpose for developing a calmly abiding mind is as a basis for special insight. Those of the highest caliber use this powerful tool for the analysis of the 4 noble truths and to investigate reality in order to rid themselves of the disturbing emotions and free themselves from cyclic existence. When such highly developed concentration is accompanied not just by a lack of attachment to this life, but by a lack of attachment to future lives within cyclic existence, it becomes an authentic spiritual path, since the wish for freedom is present. When it is accompanied by the altruistic intention, it becomes a Bodhisattva practice. End of quote. Even generally speaking, we can see many advantages of generating calm abiding. As Kunsang Pelden says, if the mind is distracted by objects of desire, fluttering like a scrap of paper caught in a tree, no matter what recitations or austerities are performed, their hoped-for aim will not be achieved. So this is really a paraphrase of the content of Shantideva's verse. Moreover, and by way of stark contrast, if we have actually accomplished calm abiding, samadhi, we will no longer be under the thraldom of the manifest emotional afflictions. Hence, our practice will become very flexible and seemingly effortless. If it was to wander, we could immediately bring our mind back. So, however, we must acknowledge that calm abiding on its own, while it might, in a sense, suppress the ability of the afflictions to get underway, doesn't, in fact, eradicate them, especially from their root. And so we must be very, very precise about that detail. So calm abiding on its own isn't sufficient to enable us to escape from samsara. So this leads us organically, irresistibly, to the next topic. Wisdom depends upon the mind. And this refers to Shantideva's 17th verse, I quote, even those who wish to find happiness and overcome misery will wander with no aim nor meaning if they do not comprehend the secret of the mind, the paramount significance of Dharma. Geltsabje paraphrases, I quote, wisdom also depends upon the mind. A person who is not a vessel for the main Dharma of the supreme, for the main Dharma or the supreme meaning, and is thus not shown these, does not know the secret of the mind, the ultimate truth. Although they wish to attain highest happiness and destroy the sufferings of cyclic existence, and that's us, of course, that's exactly what we want to do, they will wander naturally to the realm without respite, where there is nothing of these things they wished for. Therefore, concludes Gyaltsab, wisdom depends on the mind. So the message is clear. Those who are not suitable vessels for the supreme meaning, referring to the secret of the mind, its ultimate nature, its lack of true existence, will continue to naturally wander within samsaric states. The naturally there is interesting because it means they don't have to do anything special to do that. They'll simply do it. They'll naturally wander without any decision having been made to do so, because they have not tackled the fundamental problem. And thus, they will not attain what they aspire towards, namely happiness, whether temporal or ultimate. Even if they should wish to escape, and valiantly, even courageously engage in multiple activities to do so, and again, this might be referring to ourselves, they will be unable to achieve their goals. Why? Why so? This is a critical question. It's because they have not penetrated to the ultimate nature of reality. That this continued wandering will be without respite is due to their mind and, in particular, their lack of wisdom. But just as a lack of wisdom is due to the mind, so is its development. So we must bear in mind this flip side of what seems like and actually isn't an insurmountable problem. So on the one hand, Shantideva is saying if we don't do anything about it, naturally we're going to suffer continuously, and this is dependent on our mind of not knowing the nature of reality. But if we come to know the nature of reality, then definitely we'll be able to overcome. So the same mind's involved, at least the general mind that we have, but if we can flip it into a wisdom mind, it will suddenly develop this extraordinary capacity to overcome obstacles in an extraordinary fashion. As Geshe Doga says, I quote, "Wisdom is perfected to the state of going beyond, to the state of enlightenment, when one understands the ultimate reality of one's mind." Therefore, Gyaltsab's commentary concludes, wisdom depends on the mind. So again, ignorance leading to suffering and wisdom leading to liberation and enlightenment by the accomplishment or the fulfillment of the six perfections equally depend on the mind. This is perhaps a remarkable thought, one deserving careful and prolonged examination, because the key to our practice resides within it. I can't emphasize that strongly enough. I thought to quote from a sutra here. "Monks and scholars should well analyze my words like gold to be tested through melting, cutting, and polishing, and then adopt them, but not for the sake of showing me respect." In the key to the middle way, His Holiness gives an elaboration of this key quotation in terms of the four reliances, which are sourced from Maitreya. The first reliance is that one should rely not on the person of the teacher, but on the tenets or doctrines that they teach. So not on the person, but on the tenets or the doctrines, if you like. Secondly, one should not rely on the euphony and so forth of her words, but on their meaning. So don't let beautiful language or poetics lead you astray here. No matter how convincing they might sound rhetorically, what is that person actually saying? Thirdly, with respect to the meaning, one should not rely on those teachings that require interpretation. Such interpretation would be necessary, His Holiness elaborates, if there was some other non-explicit base in the teacher's thought, referring to Shakyamuni Buddha. If there was a purpose for the teachings being stated in interpretable form, and if the explicit words of the teaching were susceptible to refutation. One should rely rather on those teachings that have definitive meaning, that is, which do not require interpretation. This is definitive in the sense that they arrive at the final meaning directly and concisely, precisely. With respect, and this refers to the fourth reliance, to the definitive meaning, one should not rely on a dualistic consciousness, but on, this is crunch, a non-conceptual wisdom. This is referring to the direct cognition of emptiness, in which the subject meditator and the object emptiness merge into each other indistinguishably, like water into water. It's said that that state is inexpressible because in that state of non-duality, we can't talk about the subject observing the experience of emptiness, for example, because that sets up a division between subject and object, which has been dissolved in that profound direct realization, non-conceptual realization of emptiness. So there's no intrusion or layer of conceptual kind of buzz going on that we have to somehow penetrate through to get to object. We're actually completely at one with it. So language collapses in terms of being able to describe that state. So this is a vital passage from His Holiness because he often quotes this at big public teachings because it renders unshakable truth, irrefutable truth, in terms of a non-conceptual realization of emptiness. All the Buddha's teachings, in their profundity and vastness, flow from this insight into the ultimate nature of things. So this is what releases us from suffering. Not the Buddha's person, not the Buddha's words, not so forth. It's our own generation of this mind within our own continuum, based on the instructions of the Buddha. So therefore, His Holiness explains that in order to generate such a direct cognition of emptiness, it will be necessary to precede it developmentally with the formation of a conceptual awareness of emptiness. And that in turn must depend solely on a correct reasoning. So that's a quote from His Holiness, solely upon a correct reasoning, a correct mode of reasoning. Therefore, in the words of His Holiness, and I quote, fundamentally, this process traces back solely to a reasoning which itself must fundamentally trace back to valid experiences common to ourselves and others. Thus, it is the thought of Dignaga and Dharmakirti, the kings of reasoning, that fundamentally a reasoning derives from obvious experience. So what's the point here and where does it lead us? It's a way of answering the question of how the Buddha frees us from suffering and leads us to happiness. It is by virtue of the teaching of fundamental truth, of the way in which things actually exist, that we come to this accomplishment. And this ability to come to this realization of the nature of things depends solely upon our own mind. In other words, unless we realize the paramount significance of the Dharma, quoting from Shantideva's verse, in this way, via a personal mind generation of wisdom, we will be forced, as Shantideva points out, to continually wander with no meaning nor purpose. And thus we'll be unable to avoid misery, let alone find happiness. So this leads us to examine directly what Shantideva means when he refers to the necessity of comprehending the secret of the mind. Just what might this be? And I'm going to propose that this is more than a $1 million question. It's more than a $1 billion question. It is the question to be answered. Never before have we been in a better place to begin this critical task than right now. What is this definitive reality that can't be refuted by logic, but which can also remarkably be reached via it? It is none other than ultimate reality, and especially the ultimate reality of our own minds. This is Shantideva's secret of the mind. As Kunsang Pelden says, as for wisdom, the most important thing for everyone to understand is the nature of the mind, which is empty, void of self, and luminous. Although everyone possesses it, he continues, not everyone realizes it, which is why it is described as a secret. All external phenomena arise in the mind like reflections in a mirror. They are mental fabrications. They are the mere display of the mind and do not extend beyond it. The principal task, Kunsang Pelden continues, therefore, is to understand the mind clearly, and to that end we must use reasoning. We must examine the mind. We must look for its shape, its colour, and so forth. We must search for the place where the mind arises, where it dwells, and where it ceases. And I'm just interpolating here a little comment that Kunsang Pelden is referring here to both the conventional and the ultimate natures of the mind. He continues, if we fail to understand that the mind is beyond every concept of origin, dwelling, and cessation, if we fail to penetrate this secret of the mind, its emptiness and lack of self, then however much we long to achieve the joy of nirvana and to uproot the sorrows of samsara, we will wander uselessly in misery. To sum up, therefore, in the words of the Gandharva Sutra, all Bodhisattva conduct is founded on the mind. I thought to take this opportunity to elaborate a little more here. Regarding the secret of the mind and how to precisely meditate upon it, His Holiness the Dalai Lama gives extensive applied meditation instructions in his commentary on the first Panchen Lama's root text for the precious Geluk Kagyu tradition of Mahamudra, together with its auto-commentary. And this book is very splendidly translated and sort of edited and translated by Alexander Berzin. And I mention that as a tribute because there are many passages here where the precision of Berzon's translation pushes us irresistibly closer and closer and closer towards an understanding. So this will become clear when I quote a few passages, and I'm quoting them at some length because it'd be absolutely ridiculous and impertinent for me to intrude on His Holiness's absolutely extraordinary commentary, but also because it unfolds with its own power, which has to be sort of experienced by allowing ourselves to really absorb the words. So I quote, "Now we take the mind specifically as our topic for scrutiny and use the same reasons as before to establish its being void of true inherent existence." So the reference, I have to here, the reference to before is a reference to the various kinds of analyses employed to establish the mere nullification of the object to be refuted, namely inherent existence itself. So these were given a little bit earlier in the passage. His Holiness goes on, the quote by Shantideva, that such things as a continuum or collection are not as they seem, quote, means that what is called mind is in general simply what can be labelled dependently on the collection of a continuity of former and later moments of cognition. I'll read that again. The quote by Shantideva, that such things as a continuum or collection are not as they seem, means that what is called mind is, in general, simply what can be labelled dependently on the collection of a continuity of former or later moments of cognition. His Holiness continues, thus we continue our shamatha meditation, in which our mind is serenely stilled and settle on its own conventional nature as before. But in addition, if we scrutinize in the context of this quotation the abiding, deepest nature of the mind itself as mere clarity and awareness, we see that its existence is established by virtue simply of the fact that it can be mentally labelled dependently upon a collection of its parts. Except for that, and I emphasize, except for that, its existence is not established as by anything else. This, says His Holiness, is a specific meditation on voidness of mind, on voidness with mind as the basis of that voidness. So the Shantideva quote to which His Holiness is referring here is to be found in chapter 8 of Shantideva's text, verse 101, which I quote, the continuum of consciousness, like a series, and the aggregation of constituents, like an army and such, are unreal. Since one who experiences suffering does not exist, to whom will that suffering belong? So for those who are looking at their bachelor translation, I've actually used the Vesna and Alan Wallace translation here from the Sanskrit because I feel it's a little bit sharper. So His Holiness illustrates these points, and so we're going to spend a little bit of time on this so we can really begin to work on it. His Holiness presents an illustration via his choice of an object that we can all sort of understand, and it's going to be a person, so we're still in good ground, and that person is called lucky. And this example is given in His Holiness's very, very precious and early authored text called Key to the Middle Way. His Holiness in this passage directly utilizes how we can arrive at an understanding of emptiness using logic. Firstly, His Holiness gives a tangible example of logic establishing the emptiness of the body. And he does this on the basis of Lucky's body. He points out that simply saying, I saw Lucky, or Lucky has become old, or Lucky has become fat, we do say these things about people, don't we, are not examples of a wrong consciousness up to that point, in that it accords with our usual commonplace everyday understanding of who Lucky is and what Lucky looks like. So, as His Holiness says, quote, a consciousness that perceives such without analysis is not a wrong consciousness, and these statements also are not wrong. Lucky is fact. This is because, says His Holiness, a conventional consciousness is involved validly in ascertaining that fact about Lucky's body. But the crunch, however, says His Holiness, when analysis is done, a real Lucky, who is the possessor of the body, is not to be seen, and is aging and is becoming fat, cannot stand up to analysis. Further, with respect to the goodness or badness of Lucky's mind, Lucky is designated a good or a bad man, but Lucky's mind is itself not Lucky. So Lucky's body's not Lucky, and Lucky's mind's not Lucky. So you can see here that we're eliminating options. In short, says His Holiness, there is not the slightest part which is Lucky among the mere collection of Lucky's mind and body, his continuum, or individual parts. Therefore, dependent upon the mere collection of Lucky's body and mind, we designate Lucky. So we can get into some quite interesting explorations there, but we label Lucky to that mind and body suitable to be labelled Lucky in this circumstance because of the prevailing network of commonplace understandings that by that designation we'll be all able to identify a particular person as Lucky in this case. As Nagarjuna says in his Precious Garland, His Holiness quotes Nagarjuna at this point, the person is not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not space, not consciousness, and not all of them. What person is there other than these? So His Holiness points out in some detail that to see a part of Lucky's body, perhaps his arm or his head, is sufficient, or if you like, will suffice to say that we have seen Lucky's body. This is interesting already. This again accords with the conventions of the world. So if I've got my car parked in a garage and I see the corner of the back of the car, the boot and the left-hand light and so forth, That suffices to label that my physical car is in the garage. I don't need to see the entirety of all the parts in order to label car there. But if we start to logically examine where we can actually locate Lucky's body, we'll run quickly into difficulties, because in terms of an ultimate analysis, Lucky's body cannot be found. His Holiness explains, if the body is divided into its individual parts, legs, arms, and so on, a body is not found. Also, the legs and arms can be divided into toes and fingers, the toes and fingers into joints, the joints into upper and lower portions. These can be divided into smaller parts, and even the smallest parts into parts corresponding to the directions. And again, the crunch. When they are divided in this way, none of these entities is findable. So we're now in a position to look to see whether or not we can find Lucky's mind, really. So you can see you haven't at all left Shantideva behind. His Holiness says, furthermore, Lucky is said to be happy or unhappy according to whether his mind is at ease or not. What is this mind which is the basis of this determination? It does not exist as anything physical. It lacks anything tangible. Any object can appear to it, and it exists as an entity of mere knowing. This is often given as the definition of mind, by the way. Any object can appear to it, it has this ability to give rise to appearances, and it exists as a mode of mere knowing. It can ascertain the object appearing to it. His Holiness continues, further, it is like this when it is not analysed, but when analysed, it is unfindable. When Lucky's mind is happy, the entity of that mind is to be analysed. If it is divided into individual moments, there is no mass that is a composite of the many former and later moments. At the time of the later moments, the former moments have ceased. This is referring to our mind as well. The example is Lucky's mind, but this is exactly what's happening in our mind. The former moments have ceased, therefore the former moments have gone, and their conscious entity has disappeared. Because the future moments have not yet been produced, they are also not existing now. Also, the single moment that is not separate from what has already been produced and which has not yet been produced cannot be pointed out. So we arrive at the crunch. Therefore, says His Holiness, when it is sought thus, one is unable to establish a present consciousness. When the happy mind, which is an object discussed in his mind is happy, is sought, it is utterly unfindable. In short, happy and unhappy minds, and so forth, are designated to a mere collection of their own former and future moments. Even the shortest moment is imputed to its parts. It has the individual parts of a beginning and an end. If a moment were partless, there could be no continuum composed of them. So the conclusion we must draw here is that the mind, like the body, and like the collection of mind and body, when sought, is utterly unfindable. This means it exists as a mere designation in dependence on the parts that are its base of designation, namely, in the case of the mind, a mere collection of its own former and later moments. We have to say here mere collection because when sought, this mere collection will itself be unfindable, because a collection is merely imputed in dependence on its parts. So in this way, we refer directly back to Shantideva's verse in chapter 8, which I'll again quote. The continuum of consciousness like a series and the aggregation of constituents like an army and such are unreal. Since one who experiences suffering does not exist, to whom will that suffering belong? End of quote. So where is the army really? Where is the forest really? Where is the collection of body parts really? I sometimes think of here the example. In Australia, we have a dozen eggs, but I notice sometimes when you buy plastic egg containers for your fridge shelf, they only have 10 spots on them. So what happens to the dozen when you've only got 10 spots for 10 eggs? It seems to be a different metric. But the point is that there is no dozen from the side of the collection of eggs. And if there was, we would have to be able to find it if we searched for it. So as we got closer, we'd have to pick up one egg. Is the dozen in that egg? No. Put that aside. Is the dozen in that egg? No. Put that aside. Is the dozen in that egg? No. Put that aside. And you can see here where we're going. We end up getting to the 12th egg, putting that aside. Where is the dozen? It can't be found separately from the dozen eggs, because then we wouldn't need eggs to cook an omelette. We'd have to pick a dozen and make a dozen omelette without even having eggs, because it's separate. It's not the way things are at all. We merely label a dozen onto, in this case, a collection of 12 eggs. So this is really an example of how the labeling process works. His Holiness gives the example of a rosary. And I actually dropped mine. Well, I should have picked it up early. Not good to leave a rosary on the ground. The whole, one rosary. Rosary. Ross's rosary. Ross dropped his rosary. That's conventionally true. And this is Ross's rosary, conventionally. His Holiness, the whole, the one rosary has 108 beads as its parts. The parts and whole, the rosary, composed of 108 beads, and the parts, the 108 beads that compose the whole one rosary, are conventionally different. Yet, when the parts are eliminated, just like those dozen, the rosary cannot be found. Because the rosary is one and its parts many, the rosary is not the same as its parts. This is really crucial and really a very, very subtle point. And another reason why it can't be the same as its parts is because the rosary is labeled in dependence on its parts. If it was already its parts, there would be absolutely no point or purpose in labeling it a rosary, because it would already be findable there. So when the parts of the rosary are eliminated, we will find no rosary which exists separately. Therefore, in the words of His Holiness, is not inherently or fundamentally different from its parts. So it's not the same as its parts. It's not different from its parts. Because the rosary does not exist separately from its parts, says His Holiness, it does not inherently depend upon its parts, nor do its parts depend upon it. Also, the beads do not inherently belong to the rosary. When I was giving lectures at university in the context of theorizing fine art practice to practicing art students, I used to show, I'd raise the issue of ethnography and meaning, an important topic. But I showed some photographs of tribal people from the Sepik region in Papua New Guinea who were wearing clocks that were placed inside their stretched earlobes as adornments. So that beautiful photograph used to trigger off any number of interesting discussions. But you can see why it's so interesting. There is nothing intrinsically time-telling about the collections of parts which enable us to label clock here. If there was, then it would always be a time-telling device spontaneously, even for those who are wearing the clock in their earlobes as a kind of cargo cult fetish of the colonial impact of the first soldiers arriving there during the Second World War, which is actually what did happen. So, since forests, says His Holiness, armies, continents, and countries are imputed to aggregations of many parts, when each is analysed as to whether or not it is this or not that, it is utterly unfindable. So His Holiness's reference there to armies is a direct extraction from the Shantideva verse, which was read a little bit earlier. In his Mahamudra commentary, His Holiness next moves on to an exploration of the lack of inherent existence of objects other than the mind. In other words, just as the Panchen Lama does in his root text, His Holiness next explains how we're to comprehensively expand our realization that the mind is devoid of inherent existence in order to understand the voidness of everything to which the mind can give an appearance of. These words have been chosen very, very particularly. To understand the voidness of everything to which the mind gives an appearance of. In other words, just as the Panchen Lama does in his root text, we investigate deeply how things appear to our mind, the manifold things that appear to our mind. This strange-looking object looks like an elaborate headdress or something worn in some circumstances, but it's actually a headphone holder. So how does that appear? It appears to be a headphone holder, to me at least, from its own side. Oh, there's my headphone holder. I've lost my headphone holder. Where's it gone? So where is the headphone holder? If we search for it amongst its parts, we do exactly the same kind of analysis as we did with the mala or Lucky's body or Lucky's mind. His Holiness, if the mind to which appearances arise is empty, then how can we find those appearances as existing in and of themselves, able to set themselves up as though from their own side? So if they existed as appearances from their own side, I'm elaborating here, then even when they weren't appearing, to my mind, they would still be manifesting that appearance, because that appearance is their innate nature. An example would be a sound. A sound would exist as a sound even when not heard. It would be sounding its own nature of sound by nature of being objectively, in and of itself, a sound. So that's not a description at all at what a sound is. A sound is merely imputed conceptually to a base which is able to support that name. So His Holiness, in everyday life, our mind gives rise to an appearance of so many things: mountains, fences, pastures, houses, towns, and so on. Sights, sounds, smells, taste, tactile or bodily sensations, and mental events or objects. You see the direct relationship here with the passages in the Heart Sutra, which we read at the beginning of the class. Since when we have gained, His Holiness says, when we've gained an understanding of voidness to some extent according to our capacity, in other words, when we have gained some understanding of existence established by virtue of dependent arising, then no matter what our mind gives rise to an appearance of right now, we think that it exists as what it is, simply relative to causes and conditions. It exists as what it is by virtue of mental labeling, by virtue simply of the conventions and factors other than itself. Since it exists simply as what can be apprehended as a cognitive object by conceptual thought, this is still quoting Solness's marvelous passage, then anything mind gives rise to an appearance of as its object of cognition exists simply as what can be labeled by conceptual thought that is able to conceive it. We are now aware, says His Holiness, of the non-inherent existence of everything our mind gives rise to an appearance of, including our mind itself. We are aware of the deepest nature of these things, namely that because their existence is established by virtue simply of conceptual thought, everything is devoid of all impossible ways of existing, such as independent existence, and we might add, established by virtue of an inherent findable self-nature or defining characteristic, etc. So His Holiness, when we are completely certain of this, we scrutinize the nature of this devoid nature or the deepest truth itself. We look closely to see if there is a void nature that is immune from being itself devoid, of existing inherently. End of quote. So this is on pages 153 to 4, if anyone's wanting to follow up in His Holiness's book. And I've quoted this remarkable passage in order to propose how deep recognition of the final mode of existence of the mind, our mind, its great secret, is then unfolded to embrace recognizing the final mode of existence of all things. His Holiness's words of conclusion: nothing exists as what it is without depending simply on factors other than itself. In other words, when the mind that apprehends the dependent arising appearance of things makes something appear as its object of cognition, it understands, this is the way wisdom understands things, it understands that what this is merely an appearance of, being an appearance of this or that, arises dependently by virtue simply of labeling. This realization induces conviction in the understanding or meaning of its non-existence as something existing through its own power, independently of anything else. So there's no headphone holder existing through its own power, independently of a relation to anything else. Thus, as the root text quotes, His Holiness is referring to the Panchen Lama's root text here, while this is dawning, to immerse your awareness in it and totally absorb, my goodness, an exclamation there. This is really an expression of the astonishment of the non-conceptual realization of emptiness. It's absolutely, my goodness, that's the way it is. That's recognized subsequent to meditative absorption, of course. So I'm conscious that some of us are grappling in our approach to the topic of emptiness. I think it's a healthy thing to be doing, to be grappling, and might even, frankly, be overwhelmed, at least at times, by its many challenges, perhaps concluding that it is beyond our current capability. But I thought here to quote from Kabje Zopa Rinpoche on the potency of just hearing the word emptiness in this context, let alone comprehend its meaning. And I do this by way of inspiration not to give up, especially when we're just beginning to be truly perplexed and puzzled by this great conundrum. How can merely labeled things nonetheless exist and function? So before quoting Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, I wanted to just preface with a few carefully chosen words from His Holiness again. His Holiness, it is impossible to explain the import of the realization of emptiness in the context of just hearing or reading an explanation. It is something that has to be worked at over a long period of time, together with all the practices of morality, refraining from harm and extending compassion, and through making supplications to the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, and the teachers, other teachers, for help in overcoming obstacles. We need many positive causes. And I just recollect when Geshe Doga was teaching on this topic, and he had a question from the room about, this is just too hard, Geshe Doga, I can't follow at all, Geshe Doga stopped the explanation, took some time out, and then directly addressed the entire room, saying, never has there been a better time for you to begin to approach this topic, because there is so much to be gained. And I just know from my own experience, even though I, of course, flounder and get lost in these incredibly profound texts, I continue to seek to swim in them, because not only can I approach the words in these texts, but I have the support of an oral transmission of explanations coming to me, as it's coming to all of us. I'm not saying there's anything special here, but I'm a little tiny thimble vessel underneath an avalanche of pure discursive explanation of the meanings of emptiness according to the most subtle Prasangika Madhyamika view, based on the Panchen Lama's text, based on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, based on the precious words of the Buddhas, in an unbroken form across century after century after century, even allowing for multiple inroads of cultural changes and translocations, as Buddhism went from India to China, India to Tibet, from Tibet to wherever, so forth. It's been an incredibly vast mosaic of transmissions, but nonetheless, we currently have access to these extraordinary ideas that lead us into a direct realization of the nature of reality. This is unbelievably precious. So, Kabje Zopa Rinpoche says, by meditating on the ultimate nature of the I, the mind, and so forth, you are able to realize this ultimate nature, which is emptiness only. Realizing their emptiness is the wisdom realizing the emptiness of the I and the mind. With it, we are able to eliminate this ignorance, the hallucinatory mind, which is the basis of all other disturbing thoughts. Not just the three poisonous minds, anger, ignorance, and attachment, are included here. It takes in all the forms of mental disturbances that branch out from them. This is remarkable to think about. Rinpoche, by eliminating the cause, ignorance, together with the other disturbing thoughts, we do not produce negative karma. And so there is no suffering and no way to experience the result of suffering, the cycle of death and rebirth, true sufferings, and so forth. Because the I and the mind, or could add here the mind as well, couldn't we, are dependent arisings, there is a possibility of achieving liberation, which is the cessation of all suffering and its causes. By developing this wisdom and practicing it together with great compassion, loving kindness and bodhicitta derived from these, we are able to cease all the mental stains, including the subtle ones. We complete all the realizations, which is full enlightenment. Such possibilities arise because the I, the creator of one's own happiness and problems, the aggregates, the mind, and so forth, are themselves dependent arisings. Everything is a dependent arising, and every dependent arising is empty. Due to being like this, the whole thing works. One can achieve path and its goal. End of quote. But let me repeat, due to this, the whole thing works. Spun hypothetically around the other way, due to not being like this, nothing works. So we're left with this incredible quandary, the most exciting quandary that we've ever stumbled upon. It's either this way or that way, because dependent arising and inherent existence are antithetical, directly oppositional, antithetical entities, if you like. It can't be both a dependent arising and inherently existent, because inherent existence means that it's not dependent on other things for its existence, such as parts, such as labeling, and so forth. So if things were not empty dependent arisings, then I could not even be uttering these words. If words existed inherently, what need of my throat, my breath, my tongue? The fact that the meaning of words must be learnt, this is obvious, also signals that they cannot be the inherent bearer of their own internal meaning. As Chandra Kirti says in clear words, all the words in this world are said to be without nature and as nothing. Therefore, there's really no way around attempting to come to terms with emptiness, or at least attempting to swivel ourselves to face the right direction. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche says, even to merely sow the seeds to realize it is a truly astonishing achievement and is a sign of immense merit accumulated by us in past lifetimes. Every time you meditate on emptiness, you purify so much negative karma. It's as if you had dropped an atomic bomb. The text roaring sound of the snow line explains that if somebody was to build stupas of the 7 types of precious jewels and then fill the universe of the great 1,000 of the 3,000, what Western science calls as galaxies, with them, the merit obtained would be greater beyond measure. But such merit is exceeded by fearlessly and with patience meditating on profound emptiness for the period of time that it takes to snap your fingers once. Suddenly, what appeared in the first case to be great merit becomes very small. The meeting of the Father and Son Sutra also mentions, Kabje Zopa Rinpoche continues, that the amount of merit accumulated from practicing the 5 paramitas of charity, morality, patience, joyous effort, and concentration for 10 eons is greatly exceeded by listening to the teachings on emptiness. Consider how difficult it is to live in pure morality for just 1 year to really appreciate this. Simply examine your mind. The point I'm making here, this is Rinpoche talking in the first person, is that merely listening to teachings on emptiness enables you to accumulate unbelievable merit, causes of happiness, and good karma. Considering this, you should realize how unbelievably fortunate we are. Leaving aside the possibility or the opportunity to study, reflect, and meditate on emptiness, just to hear a few lines from the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, let alone a complete teaching, is extremely rare. Without considering other types of sentient beings who are non-human, such as animals and so forth, even in the various universes where there are so many things, very few have this opportunity. Rinpoche continues, even if they live for 100 years, even if they live for 200 years, no matter how long they live, they have neither the karma nor the opportunity to hear one single stanza of teaching on the wisdom gone beyond. Nor will the positive imprint for realizing emptiness arising from hearing that one syllable, one stanza, occur for them in the future. Rinpoche continues, it is simply said that simply generating faith in emptiness or having the interest or wish to realize it enables us to purify the 10 non-virtues, the heavy negative karmas, such as the uninterrupted 5 negative karmas, degenerated vows of pratamoksha, and so forth. Just the wish to hear the prajnaparamita path purifies eons of negative karma accumulated in past lifetimes, and meditating on emptiness for even 1 second is even more powerful. This is why the sutra teachings recommend that we make every effort to understand emptiness. Also, by making offerings to shunyata teachings such as the Prajnaparamita texts, we accumulate unbelievable merit. So what need to mention the vast merit created by composing them? So I thought it was uplifting, really, to quote these extraordinarily encouraging words from our precious teacher, particularly at this time when it's only a matter of days since the anniversary of his passing to parinirvana. And they are so powerfully encouraging that we should not for a moment give up on our effort to embrace some understanding of this extraordinary topic, as I've been proposing here. In summary, if we wish to free ourselves from cyclic existence, we must investigate reality in order to rid ourselves of the disturbing emotions. When combined with definite emergence, renunciation, and thus surrendering clinging to not just this life, but to future lives, it becomes, as Kunsang Pelden earlier mentioned, an authentic spiritual path. When accompanied by the altruistic intention, it becomes a Bodhisattva practice, as Kunsang Pelden said. So through the force of which, Bodhisattva practice, we can overcome the obscurations to omniscience, thereby fulfilling our Bodhisattva aspiration to become fully enlightened for the benefit of countless sentient beings. We're doing it with that goal in mind. There's another vital, I've used the word takeout here, which is a bit awkward, isn't it? But if you forgive the use of such a vernacular term in this very auspicious context, we cannot generate the profound and intensely powerful levels of love and compassion required to fuel us along the Bodhisattva's path unless we generate knowledge of the emptiness of inherent existence of all things. Why? In the final chapter of his wonderful, practical emptiness meditation manual, and I'm calling it a manual, but you can also call it a kind of primer, how to see yourself as you really are. His Holiness the Dalai Lama makes this point very, very, very vividly. Firstly, he quotes Chandrakirti, I offer homage to loving concern, viewing transitory migrators as empty of inherent existence, though they appear to exist inherently like a reflection of the moon in water. And His Holiness glosses, the reflection of the moon in clear, calm water appears to be the moon in every respect, but it is not the moon in any respect. The moon is, in this case, actually in the sky. This image, this reflected moon image, symbolizes the appearance of the eye and all other phenomena as if they inherently exist. appearing as though in their own right they are empty of such, says His Holiness. Like someone mistaking a reflection of the moon for the moon, we mistake the appearance of I and all other phenomena for things that exist in their own right. So how does this relate to love and compassion? We haven't forgotten that thread. You can use this metaphor, says His Holiness, as a way to develop insight into how we are unnecessarily drawn into suffering by assenting to false appearances, thereby falling prey to lust and hatred and all the actions that stem from them, accumulating karma and being born over and over again in a cycle of pain. This insight will stimulate profound love and compassion because you will vividly see how unnecessary all these ills are. His Holiness adds to his explanation here, he says, with an insight fresh in your mind, great love and great compassion arise in you for all sentient beings. You feel close to them because they want happiness and not suffering just as you do. And you feel the impact of their having been your closest friends over the course of countless lifetimes, sustaining you with kindness. So here we can see that the understanding of emptiness, which is also the understanding of dependent arising in a profound way, leads us to really appreciate, perhaps for the first time in a really vast cosmological sense, our incredible connection to other beings, to other people. And so we can generate this amazingly powerful intimacy, wishing to work for their benefit, even in response to their harm, as is the Bodhisattva's way. So the crunch from our current perfection of wisdom perspective, which is what we're doing, to gain access to this depth of love and compassion, it is necessary first, and these are the words of His Holiness now, that you yourself understand that you, yourself, and other sentient beings are empty of inherent existence. Therefore, in short, without realizing the secret of the mind, which entails that we also non-dualistically understand how all phenomena lack true existence, we'll be unable to perfect the perfections. This is because we cannot achieve enlightenment, nor even nirvana, by dint of method alone. This is why Shantideva in this verse, the 17th verse of chapter 5, is emphasizing the paramount significance of Dharma resides precisely in having this realization. And of course, such realization is obtained or held in dependence on our own minds. It would be crazy to consider it might occur elsewhere. So I might continue, but if we've got a little bit of time, if anyone wants to raise or share any thoughts, reflections, or questions. Sorry, Tenzin, just saying. I have to ask you to unmute. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
Yes.
Lovely.
Can you tell us which book you were reading from Lama Zopa, please?
No, that was some material that I edited. Yes, in a text. Yeah, but I can reference you, so I'll post it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's also Rinpoche said things along those lines many times. And it's incredibly uplifting, isn't it? Stephen.
Oh, thank you, Ross. I just have to say how grateful I am to have such an extraordinary teaching. So much insight from you. And just
It's
like,
not my insight, but I'm just pretending
well,
to have insight.
you've
That's why
transmitted it. And then
I'm relying heavily on my incredible text here.
yes, no doubt, but
Yeah.
also putting your spin on it is makes it even better. Um, and it comes back to a comment on one thing you said about Geshe Doga stopping during his teaching on emptiness, putting out that now is the best time of all.
Mm.
There's no better time. But also, I have to reflect a little bit. I'm sure the other students who are listening, who are all advanced students, have had the same experiences. When you look at a text, I think back, years ago, maybe looking at the Lam Rim or something like that. And then now when I look at it, it's extraordinary. It's almost like a different text. It's like that, oh my goodness, realization. It was all there all along. I just hadn't caught up with it.
So would you like to elaborate a little bit what it is that happens that makes the text come to life in that way?
I think it's partly what you mentioned is just continually exposing oneself to the teachings and hearing them from different teachers.
Mm.
And this is part of the value of your contribution, Dr. Ross, is every teacher gives a slightly different slant and emphasis and so on, says things with slightly different phraseology and vocabulary. And all of that sort of gives you a different perspective or parallax,
Mm-hmm.
this, multi-dimensional object that we're trying to understand.
Yeah.
I had another thing. So key to the middle. There's a passage that His Holiness says here, where he says, because the future moments have not yet been produced, they are not existing now. The future is unborn. Also, the single present moment is not separate from what has already been produced and what has not yet been produced. If the present moment, and this kind of our experience of like how hard it is to hold on to the presence is kind of captured by that, because it's just such an infinitesimal slice of time. And if you say that it really the present moment is not separate from what's already been produced, and yet what has been produced is completely disintegrated. And if you say the present moment is not separate from what is about to be produced, that is what is yet unborn, it's a little bit of a conundrum. Like, what does exist? It
I
just
think it's
made me
well.
laugh.
No, it's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's necessary to think that we don't just label the mind to the present moment. We label it to the continuum, and that continuum does exist now. And so on that basis, we have an apprehension of my mind, which is perfectly valid. So yesterday, my mind decided to go shopping in a particular shop. And tomorrow, I plan not to go shopping in that shop, but to another shop. So my mind is involved in all of these sort of impulses and activities, if you like. But that's all very well in ordinary terms, conventional parlance, no problem whatsoever with that kind of language. And I shouldn't be having metaphysical fits over it. But if I then think, does my mind exist in and of itself as it appears to, particularly as my mind, because I certainly don't think that my mind is your mind. I mean, I might love to have your mind, but you can't swap. I'm just joking, but this is one of Cronenberg's famous sort of the body snatchers, that dreadful horror
If
film.
I had your mind, Ross, I would be you, and it wouldn't be me anymore.
That's what I'm saying. It's a real problem, isn't it? So that's the point we're making. So if you analyze by getting closer and closer to the way in which the mind's appearing to exist in and of itself, then we break it down into those parts and have enormous trouble finding it. In fact, we can't find our mind at all, not one microscopic moment of it. And this is actually a problem for Western science too. I was listening to Alan Wallace's account of what is consciousness today on a YouTube video. It was a little 7-minute YouTube. It was very, in his customary fashion, extraordinarily articulate and meaningful. And he was suggesting that science's attempts to sort of work out these impulses of moments, on a sort of technological level, are completely barking up the wrong tree, because that isn't actually talking about the mind at all. And he drew us back to the fact that the mind is this lucid spaciousness, if you like, to which things can appear and be ascertained. That functional definition of the mind, I think, is very, very helpful to keep in mind when we're faced with that dilemma about where might the mind be if we start to analyze it. Because if I just relax and let go of trying to control things, my mind continues to give rise to appearances. Even at the time of death, my mind is going to be giving rise to appearances. And so the great challenge for us as meditators, and particularly as Buddhists attempting to become bodhisattvas for the benefit of others, is that we start to observe what that mind is doing from a kind of impartial, balanced perspective, as Shantideva is continually asking us to do. And in this chapter, he's wanting us to develop vigilance and mindfulness continuously so that we can understand the activities and impulses, if you like, that our minds are engaged in, and start to steer them skillfully, eliminating those that have to be eliminated and gaining or developing those that have to be developed. I think another thing to think about is the issue of tenets is really, really important, because one can get very confused studying this topic if one seeks to roam very generally across a whole array of literature, because it may be presented from the perspectives of particular tenet systems. We're not saying that that's a problem. All of those tenet systems in this case are authentic spiritual traditions, but it does become very confusing potentially, because even terms which will be used in common will convey different meanings in those different traditions. And so we can spend a lot of time getting ourselves thoroughly confused. And so that's why today I particularly, apart from quoting precious Kapte Zepa Rinpoche and Geshe Doga, have referred to books by His Holiness, and also holding here Transcendental Wisdom, a commentary on the wisdom chapter of Shantideva, which is another incredibly precious commentary, because His Holiness is perfectly synthesizing this material and bringing it back to something that we can begin to do now. And so in How to See Yourself, he's actually giving us graduated meditation instructions on what to do now, then what to do next, then dependent on this, what to do next. It is very, very coherent and very, very approachable indeed. So it's translated by Jeffrey Hopkins too, which is always a very good thing for this difficult material. These books I love so much. I just open them at random. Sorry, I forgot you were all there for a moment. Only the highest philosophical perspective within Buddhism contains an additional consideration that because the designation of something as a cause depends upon consideration of its effect, in this sense, a cause depends upon its effect. Something is not a cause in and of itself. It is named a cause in relation to its effect. So simply like the mind's moments, we can sort of do it there as well. Here, the effect does not occur before its cause, and its cause does not come into being after its effect. It is in thinking of its future effect that we designate something as a cause. This is dependent arising in the sense of dependent designation. So that's just a little section at random. So I often meditate in this serendipitous way, not trivially, because that would be to render the material trivial, which of course it never is, but it's very, very helpful just often to read one stanza or one paragraph of these remarkable commentaries and to just spend some time dwelling upon it in your own way. So I say that by way of approaching some of these texts, because to sit down and read from beginning to end, it requires an incredible commitment, and perhaps one that would be best spent in retreat so that one could really absorb the meaning of the words. But allowing that for the fact that that might be a very difficult circumstance to gather for ourselves, it is possible to just dip into the text. Now, I think there's a bit of mysticism in that dipping, because how often it is that when we're searching for something and we open the book, there it is. So I think that's an example of how the Buddhas guide us miraculously, which I raised at the end of last session. There's sort of a magic to the way in which these texts reveal themselves. Yeah, so sorry, Lou, you were asking.
There was a book you were quoting from. It was a translation that Bertson had done, and His Holiness the Dalai
Yes,
Lama. I forgot the name of the book.
it's called the Geluk Kagyu tradition
Okay.
of Mahamudra. And it was Snowline. Snowline is defunct now. It was brought up and absorbed, but this book is still available, and there are some versions of it around as well, I notice. And as I mentioned, Berson's translation can seem a little bit ponderous sometimes, a little bit kind of clumsy, but when you spend more time with the text, you realize exactly what it is that Berson's attempting to do, which is to unpack some of these terms that we throw around, like lacks inherent existence. Instead of that, he'll say lacks existence from its own side on the spot where it appears to already be. Isn't that fascinating? That's an identification of the dimension, if you like, of the object of negation. That's precisely what is to be refuted by this wisdom mind. And so there's what ordinarily appears to us, because it's been grasped by ignorance, is in fact the object of negation. And this point's made in Pabonka Rinpoche's Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand as well. So His Holiness says, if we're looking for the object of negation somewhere else, in some strange place, we've got it wrong. We have to pay attention to the unfolding of our own cognitive experience and work on that coalface in our meditation. And that's why we had that earlier quote with Dignaga and Dharmakirti saying that we had to base our realizations in commonplace experience. We have to work from where we are actually now. How's that appearing to us? And I gave the example last week of that person approaching us who appeared as just a shape, then they appear to be a person, then they appear perhaps to be we designate them male or female. And then we recognize that they were the person who insulted us a week ago. At each point in that process, that bearer of qualities is appearing towards us as though from its own side, independently of the way in which we're refining our designatory process as we can see more and more features of that object. So it's fascinating. So rage is dependent upon seeing that object as naturally worthy of being abused by my rage, because I regard the object's ugliness to be in and of itself the bearer of its own qualities. And that's why I'm so offended, so affronted, so refusing to come into contact with it, even though it involves pushing away, even violently, another precious human being. Look at our wars. In that beautiful passage on the army, His Holiness mentioned countries. We merely designate countries on merely designated borders based on merely designated notions of boundaries of that river becoming Russia or Ukraine and so forth. If those things were innately existent, why are we going to war? There'd be no purpose. So there's a complete way in which all the afflictions are grounded on this mistaken view of reality. So Jay was thanking Stephen for his comment. So thank you, Jay. Changton, Chusang? Yeah?
Yes. I was reading the middle length Lamrim after class this week. And like Stephen shared, it's like a completely different book from the past few months. And I won't read anything, but I just want to say how incredible page 242 is.
Oh.
Just for me, it was
Yes.
just like, wow. Wow. 242 middle length Lamrim.
So this is why the Lama said there's a difference between an understanding and a realization. And so a realization hits you transformatively and it changes you from that point onwards. And so it's through a series of these accumulated actualizations of realizations, even if they're very small realizations to start with, they build because they're grounded on reality. They're stable and we can safely consolidate and become more and more effective, more and more powerful on that basis. So that's one of the reasons why Shantideva is again in this chapter emphasizing mindfulness and vigilance as crucial, because this is how we do that. Yeah. So I realized I took a bit of time off to explore that topic in more depth, but it does give you an indication of how much time you can spend with these remarkable verses. And I think there's a sense in which what I call slow reading is in fact really, really crucial to do, because it's good to do fast reading as well, because we get the overall shape of a text, but we can skate over so many implications if we're working at that speed, at least with my limited mind. So yeah. So verse 18, this being so, I shall hold and guard my mind well. Without the discipline of guarding the mind, what use are many other disciplines? This puts the whole thing in a nutshell. The cumulative or the logic here, which is sheer common sense, is undeniable. And this is why Gyaltsab Subje places this verse under a new main heading, striving in guarding the mind. And this has two presentations showing, or the presentation, and explaining. So verse 18 comes under explaining, and Gyaltsab Subje synthesizes the meaning. He says, abandoning faults and achieving qualities depends upon the mind. Therefore, I shall hold this mind of mine well with mindfulness and introspection, and guard it well so as to not let it degenerate. Apart from the discipline of guarding the mind, what shall one do with the many other disciplines of prayers and so forth that don't guard the mind? They are unnecessary. So instead of unnecessary here, we might say pointless or purposeless. So Shantideva is seeking to coax us to resolve, to apply mindfulness and introspection and guard our mind well, so that our practice will not only not degenerate, but that it might actually work towards our intended goals. For example, if we fail to apply them by maintaining constant vigilance, our three doors of body, speech, and mind will be left unguarded. Who knows what will come out of them? So as Geshe Doga points out in his summary to this verse, degeneration means a failure to protect the precious virtuous qualities such as love and compassion. So this is really a strong thing to consider. We're talking about the degeneration of our practice in terms of the degeneration of our own virtuous qualities such as love and compassion, which is even more tragic if we consider that we might have put considerable effort, not just in this lifetime, but in previous lifetimes, to generate those minds. We're at risk if now, in this moment, we let our doorways of body, speech, and mind remain unguarded. So it's intensely personal, what's been said here. So Gyaltsab Subje's second subheading, explaining, has itself 4 subdivisions. The first is the way of guarding. The second is the reason why it's necessary to guard the mind. The third is the benefits of guarding. And the fourth is generating mindfulness to guard the mind wholeheartedly. And Geshe Doga points out how meticulous is Gyaltsab Subje's organization of headings and subheadings here, because it indicates how we're to incorporate these words of advice into our own personal practice. And so the way of guarding the mind, verse 19, just as I would be attentive and careful of a wound when amidst a bustling, uncontrolled crowd, so I should always guard the wound of my mind when dwelling among harmful people. So the meaning here is quite obvious, but the poetic pungency of our vulnerable wound-like mind in need of constant and careful attention is another of Shantideva's incredibly memorable images, once heard, never forgotten. The caution, anyway, so we know this, don't we? If we've got a wound on our hand, we actually physically shield it when we're in a crowd, because we don't want that wound to be hurt or the pain to be exacerbated. We do that for a wound. It might even be a minor wound requiring just a single band-aid. In effect, no big deal, but nonetheless, we take it pretty seriously. Why then, says Shantideva, don't we take guarding the wound of our minds seriously. So he's using the wound of the mind as a metaphor for something which needs to be protected and safeguarded from harm. And so it's very, very powerful to think about in terms of the image itself. Because our mind, our current mind, is so familiar with the delusions, it is prone to be immediately influenced by them. So much so that when we encounter even minor conditions, minor influences, minor irritants, our delusions can manifest even on a massive scale. So we see here how that metaphor of the wounded mind works so well. So sometimes it's merely, isn't it, just hearing a gossipy story about someone else. And so we're drawing in the other aspect of Shantideva's verse here, because he refers to guarding the wound of my mind when dwelling amongst harmful people. Harmful people here is referring to social situations which incline us to generate afflicted minds. And it can be as simple as hearing a dear friend gossip about another friend, and we share in that gossip in a chatty kind of casual way over a cup of tea or coffee. And while doing so, begin to remember other things that that person did to me which were similar, and find ourselves getting angry and our attitude towards that person tightening up as we sit there drinking our coffee. And so the trivial example of gossip has now suddenly become fraught and overladen. It's like the wound is suffocating, isn't it? It's bursting. Our mind is now going to burst out into an array of afflictions, which we will then have trouble containing. So Geshe Doga, somewhat bemusedly, says, the teachings tell us that when there are no apparent conditions for delusions to arise, someone may look like a true Dharma practitioner. But as soon as particular conditions arise, they may act as a very ordinary person, meaning they get angry, they try to kill someone like everyone else. So I think we'll stop there, and thank you very much for your participation. And I will ask Lou to lead our prayers. We do have something to dedicate, and particularly in this time of wars, it's really a very, very unsettled world that we're living in. And so the need to guard the wound of the mind is greater than ever. So generate and give away all the positive potential towards peace in the world. Thank you. Lou.
Dedication prayers from Shantideva. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings without the sole medicine for suffering, and the origin of every joy, be materially supported and honored, and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, to his kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen never diminish, but increase more and more. May my venerable Lama's light be firm, his white divine action spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Long life prayer for his holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until cyclic existence is ended. A prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of children of the victorious ones, Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, together with your lineage, all the opposite refuge of the infinite lands, please now bestow the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. And holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. Sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare of the choice one's teachings and mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace at this our lost hope. Nevertheless, to the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of the mind generation of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Keep well. I look forward to seeing you again next week.